Hello and welcome to the session on Jean Piaget's cognitive learning theory. Jean Piaget, a Swiss biologist, had profound interest in epistemology, a branch of philosophy concerned with nature of knowledge. But afterwards, he developed a keen interest in child and cognitive psychology. Piaget proves a larger context in which he views the acquisition of knowledge and competence as consequence of growth and interaction with the physical and social environment. Piaget had a background in biology. He called his theoretical framework as genetic epistemology because he was primarily interested in how knowledge developed in human organisms. Piaget too was an ardent spokesman of cognitive development approach to learning. He explained how out of the natural tendency to develop intellectually or cognitive, human organisms interact with the environmental stimuli, process the various items of information that draw their attention, internalize these, integrate the related ones, and thus build up a cognitive structure. By cognitive structure, he meant a totality of integrated whole containing all items of knowledge internalized built into a structure. The learning theory of Piaget explains how cognitive development happens in this manner. To explain this developmental process, Piaget uses a term schema, which he considers as the basic unit with which the cognitive structure is built up. It may be conceived as a mental image of an experience that has been received by an organism. It may be as simple as a physical schema like shuttling the eyes to a complex schema like writing. It may be physical as the one cited above, social as smiling or saying tata to a guest, conceptual like trapezium, etc. As the individual draws more and more experiences, the number and complexity of the schemas also increase. When a chain of schemas are involved in a particular task, it may be A to be a scheme. For example, setting the apparatus and conducting an experiment. The schemas or schemata and clusters of schemas resulting in schemes give shape to the cognitive structure. It is evident, therefore, that efficiency of the cognitive development of an individual is determined by the number, variety and quality of the schemas and also the way in which these are systematically form a structure. Piaget examines how this could be efficiently made possible through the process of instruction. To explain how cognitive development occurs, Piaget uses the analogy of biological adaptation. According to him, biologically every living organism would like to remain in the existing state of equilibrium without being disturbed. This is because loss of equilibrium brings out changes in the energy level, which in turn creates anxiety and threatens its safety. But at the same time, the organism cannot remain static because it has to face constantly internal and external stimuli impinging on it. The disequilibrium thus experienced is so distressing that the organism is motivated to take steps to bring back the disturbed energy level to a state of equilibrium or to equilibrate. When equilibration is made possible, the organism gets relieved because it has adapted with the situation biologically. Assimilation has been conceived by Piaget as the process by which an unfamiliar schema is made familiar by linking it with familiar schemas already existing in the cognitive structure. It is for this purpose schemas are to be shuttled forward and backward using the ability for reversibility. Once assimilation takes place, the unfamiliar schemas become ready to enter the cognitive structure. Then come the need for proper integration, registration and structuring. For this, the assimilated schemas are to be given a more suitable place in the cognitive structure so that it becomes a part of that entity. This process is known as accommodation. When the new schemas involved in the problematic situation are then assimilated and accommodated, the disequilibrium disappears and equilibrium regained. This process is equilibration. By equilibration, the individual adapts with the new problematic situation and does get developed cognitively. Stages of intellectual development. Piaget, on account of his biological background, traced the initiation of human cognitive development in terms of biologically inherited ways of interacting with the environment. He further postulated that the changes and developments in one's cognitive structure are brought about by interaction with one's physical and social environment. This task is carried out through the mechanism of equilibration, resulting in constant organization of one's cognitive structure by the interplay of accommodation and assimilation. This task of constant organization of the mental structure is an individual phenomenon. We may therefore find wide differences between children in terms of possession of cognitive abilities. However, as Piaget concluded, this organization of the mental structure in all children always takes place in a particular order involving definite stages of intellectual development. Thus, although children of the same age may differ in terms of possession of mental abilities, the order in which the abilities evolve and the pattern of development are quite constant and universal. Let us discuss this pattern of intellectual development in terms of the 4 developmental stages suggested by Piaget. 1. Sensory motor stage, from birth to about 2 years. Piaget called the first stage of intellectual development the sensory motor stage because it is characterized by the absence of language and it is limited to direct sensory and motor interactions with the environment. The cognitive development occurs along the following pattern. At birth, the infant exhibits a limited number of uncoordinated reflexes such as sucking, looking, reaching and grasping. During the next 4 months, the uncoordinated reflexes are coordinated into symbol schemas, providing the child with a general potential to perform certain classes of behavior. For example, the infant now tries to suck anything which is put into his mouth, stares at whatever he sees, reaches for everything and grasps all that is put into his hands. By the age of 8 months, the infant is able to react to objects outside him. He begins to realize that the objects around him are separate from himself and they have their independent and permanent existence. Prior to such development, his view of the environmental objects is quite object permanence transitory, that is, what is out of sight is purely out of mind. 2. Pre-operational stage, about 2 to 7 years. While stepping into the stage, the child begins to replace direct action in the form of sensory or motor exploration with symbols. The learning of the language provides him with a good tool for thinking. He begins to utter words to ask for something rather than just reaching out to get it. In addition to words, his thinking is also characterized by other symbolic representations or images of the things in the environment. This stage can be further subdivided into the pre-conceptual phase, approximately 2 to 4 years, and the intuitive phase, approximately 4 to 7 years. Pre-conceptual phase, approximately 2 to 4 years. This is the period of the rudimentary concept formation and is characterized by the following features. In the early part of the stage, the children seem to identify objects by their names and put them into certain classes. However, they usually make mistakes in this process of identification and concept formation. For example, they think all men are daddy and all women are mummy. Their mode of thinking and reasoning is quite illogical at this stage. It is neither inductive nor deductive, but rather transductive in nature. For example, the child at this stage would reason like this: as cows are big animals with 4 legs and a long tail, this animal is also big and has 4 legs and a long tail, therefore it is a cow. Their thinking is sometimes too imaginative and far removed from reality. It may be seen in their play activities when a block of wood is turned into a riding horse or motorcycle and a doll into a baby. Moreover, at this stage they are unable to distinguish between living and non-living objects. For them, the doll in their hands is a live baby who can cry, smile and sleep. The other major characteristic of the intellectual structure of the child at this stage is concerned with his egocentric nature. By egocentrism, Piaget means that the child can see the world only from his own standpoint. He cannot think that people may have different opinions and differ in their modes of thinking and conclusions. Intuitive phase, approximately 4 to 7 years. At this stage, the child progresses towards the formation of various concepts at a more advanced level. For example, now he will agree that apples, oranges and bananas are all fruits despite the differences in their shape, color or taste. But what he thinks or solves at this stage is carried out intuitively rather than in accordance with any logical rule. It is clearly reflected in the absence in him of the two main cognitive characteristics, namely reversibility, that is the ability to reverse, and conservation, that is the ability to see an object as permanent even though its length, width or shape changes. Concrete operational stage, about 7 to 11 years. This stage shows marked developments in the cognitive functioning of the child. The child now learns to deal with concepts and ideas that exist only in mental terms. He begins to think in terms of a set of interrelated principles than single bits of knowledge. His thinking becomes more logical and systematic. He can now make use of inductive and deductive approaches in terms of reasoning and arriving at conclusion. The child now develops the ability to conserve both in terms of quantity and number of objects. The thinking of the child is no longer rigid and irreversible. A female child who has a sister now clearly realizes that her sister also has a sister. The child now is no longer egocentric in his thinking. He does not think of himself as the center of the external world and does not perceive the world only from his own standpoint. The child now develops the abilities to deal adequately with classes. He can classify objects. The child now learns to carry out rather complex operations or tackle problems as long as they are concrete and not abstract. In this way, the child reaches a satisfactory level in terms of intellectual development by his thinking becoming quite systematic and logical. However, what is done or thought by him at this stage is done purely on a concrete level. His thought processes are limited to real events observed or the actual objects operated by him. He is unable to think in abstract terms. Formal operational stage, about 12 to 15 years. The intellectual development and functioning takes a very sophisticated shape at this stage as the child learns to deal with abstraction by logical thinking. Actually, he learns to utilize the tool of symbolism as effectively as possible in the process of thought and problem solving. The child now gets interested in forms. He begins to construct relationships between concrete operations and between symbols. Generalizations and framing of rules by operating in abstract terms become quite possible at this stage. The child now begins to appreciate that some hypothetical problems can be solved mentally by applying the same rules as would be applied to concrete problems. He begins to look at problems in many ways and explore various solutions, but in a very systematic and logical way. For example, if a child of this stage is shown 5 colorless, odorless liquids in test tubes and is asked to find out what combination of the 5 will produce a brown liquid, he is likely to discover the possible combination by adopting a systematic approach. Thus, it is quite distinctive in comparison to the children belonging to earlier stages of cognitive development who will simply resort to trial and error for finding the solution. Moreover, the child's thinking at this stage does not remain only concrete but becomes hypothetical with considerations given to the most unusual ideas. Hence, the creative aspects in the child are very much visible during this age, not only in terms of concrete operations but also in terms of abstraction and pure imagination. The other noticeable characteristic of this stage, as Piaget found, was a child's interest in dealing with things that do not exist in reality instead of the things concerning the present which are actually perceived by him. In fact, Piaget was of the opinion that the thought process and the intellectual functioning of a child at the formal operational period reflect the beginning of the most advanced stage in the functioning of his cognitive system. It provides a ladder to reach the limits of a person's intellectual development and actualize his potentiality to the maximum in the available circumstances. The high order of intellectual functioning developed through this stage, according to Piaget, is usually characterized by the presence of the most sophisticated cognitive abilities, like the ability to build up multiple hypotheses and a number of alternate solutions, verify all possible solutions in a systematic and logical way, and generalize and arrive at abstract rules that cover many specific situations. In this way, according to Piaget, after the expiry of the formal operation stage, the child may reach full intellectual potential. He may discover the solutions of problems through mental manipulation of symbols by adopting a logical and systematic procedure known as scientific thinking and problem solving rather than a reflexive, motor or sensory manipulation as is done at the sensory motor stage, or by exposing his thinking operationally in more concrete terms as done at the concrete operation stage. It thus represents a stage which helps the child to attain mental maturity with respect to development of his cognitive abilities. Theory into practice. Classroom applications of Piaget's theory. It makes sense to listen carefully to children and watch them solve problems to understand how they think and how they perceive their world. Instruction must be adapted to students' developmental levels. It is important to stimulate students to move beyond their current level of functioning, but not too far. For example, it is probably pointless to teach first graders the word geography because they have no conception of what a country, state or even city is. It would make more sense to teach them local geography, their neighborhood, school, classroom and so on. Teaching algebra to fourth graders is also probably a waste of time because the subject requires more ability to deal with abstractions than students at the concrete operational stage are likely to have. Another implication is that children in preschool and elementary school need to see examples of concepts. With young children, you do not say, "Imagine that I had a pie with 6 slices and I took out 2 of the slices." Rather, you must show them a picture of a pie and physically remove the slices if you expect them to learn the underlying mathematical concepts. Applying Piaget's insights to instruction means constant use of demonstrations and physical representations of ideas. Students should be allowed to experiment with materials in order to accommodate new understandings and to discover information for themselves through active participation. Discovery learning is one way in which Piaget's principles have been put into action in classroom instruction. Piagetian principles of instruction are most often applied in preschool and kindergarten programs that emphasize learning through discovery and hands-on experiences, and the teacher's role as one who sets up environment in which students can have a wide variety of learning experiences. The most obvious implication of Piaget's theory of cognitive development is that young children view the world differently from older children and adults. Consequently, Piagetian theory is often used to guide decisions about the readiness of children for specific activities. This has been especially true of the teaching of mathematics and science subjects, in which the mental operations described by Piaget are critical. Attempts to apply Piaget's ideas to early education focus on encouraging children to construct more adequate concepts. Cognitive development is not the accumulation of isolated pieces of information, rather it is of the construction by children of a framework for understanding their environment. Teachers should serve as role models by solving problems with children, explaining the problem-solving process, and talking about the relationships between actions and outcomes. Teachers should be available as resources but should not become the authorities who enforce correct answers. Children must be free to construct their own understandings. Educators should also learn from children. Observing children during their activities and listening carefully to their questions can reveal much about their interests and levels of thinking. Children's solutions to problems and their questions reveal their point of view. Let me summarize the session. The chapter gives a comprehensive picture of cognitive learning theory proposed by Jean Piaget. Piaget's concepts of cognitive structure, schema, disequilibrium, adaptation, assimilation, and accommodation are discussed. His stages of intellectual development are explained. They come under the titles sensory motor stage, pre-operational stage, concrete operational stage, and formal operational stage. The chapter also discusses the classroom implications of Piaget's theory. Now we can try to answer the questions given here. Critically analyze the cognitive learning theory proposed by Jean Piaget. What are the various stages of intellectual development according to Piaget? Compare and contrast the concrete operational stage and formal operational stage in Piaget's theory. What are the two substages of pre-operational stage? What are the classroom implications of Piaget's cognitive learning theory? Hope that you may go through the books for reference. An Introduction to Theories of Learning, B.R. Herger-Han, Prentice Hall, Angel Woodcliffe in the year 1976. Psychology, a Biographical Approach, M.J. Levin, McGraw-Hill, New York in the year 1978. Psychology of Intelligence, Jean Piaget, Littlefield Adams, Totova in the year 1966. Thank you for watching the program. We can meet again with another topic. Have a nice day.